All right. Welcome everyone. I hope I'm audible. Shubhranil, आवाज आ रही है? Good evening. Good evening. So देखो, in our previous lecture we had talked about the important characteristics and elements of Mauryan administration. Now we need to talk about the general characteristics or features of the Mauryan state. If somebody asks you what was the Mauryan state like, what are the 5-6 things you can tell them? First of all, would you agree that there were strong centralizing tendencies within the state? ठीक है. But was the administrative centralization perfect? Absolute? No. But there were practical limitations to centralization. ठीक है. Would it be correct to state that the Mauryan state was a paternalistic state? ऐसा बोलना सही होगा, गलत होगा? सही होगा. It had a strong element of paternalism within it. How do we know? What is the attitude of the father towards their children? नहीं, general terms में, what are the responsibilities of a father towards their children? To ensure their happiness and well-being, but also to maintain discipline. Okay, this is visible in the attitude of the Mauryan emperors towards their subjects. For example, Ashoka addresses these subjects as his children while addressing them, right? Further, he has taken various steps to ensure their welfare. For example, the digging of wells as an act of charity, or let us say the planting of trees along the busy trade routes so that the travelers can get shade during the summer months. Or let us say the establishment of free hospitals, not only for people, but also for animals. So all of these are welfare measures taken by him. However, has he disbanded his military? Does he punish rebellion or not? Yes. Does he expect obedience or not? Yes. There is a strong element of paternalism that is also visible. Would it be correct to say that the Mauryan state was a war state? It came into existence through the process of violent context, and it maintained its supremacy and defended its territory with the use of violence also. So it was a war state. Would it be correct to say that the Mauryan state was a bureaucratic state? ये बोलना ठीक होगा या नहीं होगा? सही होगा. Why? Because it had an extensive and organized professional bureaucracy which functioned as the most important instrument of administrative centralization. Okay? There was meticulous record keeping at every level, and accountability had been fixed in an organized manner. Okay? So all these codes were present. Would it be correct to say that the Mauryan Empire was an extensive state? Yes. On what grounds? First of all, it had a huge territory with a massive population, which was extremely diverse on that ground. And secondly, on the ground that the state performed functions outside the traditional realm of pre-modern states. Okay? So it played an active role in the economy. It had a very intrusive control over the ideology of the people, the idea of Dhamma, for example. Okay? So it was an extensive state. The Mauryan state was also a polyglot state. That means the element of diversity was present at every level of administration. कैसे बोल सकते हैं हम? The emperor may have been a Buddhist or a Jain or an Ajivika. The first three emperors. The first one was a Jain by conviction. The second one was an Ajivika, and the third one was famously a Buddhist. However, they did not exclude others from administrative positions. For example, the Guru and Prime Minister of Chandragupta Maurya was Chanakya. What was his background? He was a Brahmin. Further, foreign elements were also present within administration. We have the example of Tusappa, the governor of Saurashtra region. He was a Greek ruler who was ruling on behalf of Ashok. That is what the Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman informs us. Right? So in this way, we can say it was a polyglot state. It was also a cultural state, meaning that it was deliberately trying to create its own cultural identity and impose it upon the subject population. How do we know this? The state was involved in several cultural activities such as association with the Sangha, the construction of stupas, the erection of Ashokan pillars, the inscription of various edicts, etc. Through that, the state was trying to leave its cultural imprint on the entire population. And finally, it was also trying to be, it was a state with universal aspirations. That means it wanted contact with the subject population not to be limited only to the realm of providing them security, maintaining order, and collecting taxes. Rather, the state even wanted to decide how the subject people should think, how they should interact with each other, what should be their attitude towards the state and other important organizations, both spiritual as well as political in nature. Okay? So, while it would never have been able to become a universal state in reality because some pockets of resistance would always be present, which after all were responsible for the decline of the Mauryan Empire, at least in some respects, it was at least trying to become a universal state. So it was a state with universal aspirations. Okay? So these are the general characteristics of the Mauryan state. लिख लीजिए इसको जल्दी से. समझ में आया ना शुभ्रनिल? स्क्रीन ब्लर हो रहा है तो एक बार अपना इंटरनेट का कनेक्शन चेक करिएगा प्लीज. प्रॉब्ली दैट इज व्हाई. क्लियर है? गुड. लिखो. The Mauryan state exhibited strong centralizing tendencies. It had a large bureaucracy. And powerful army. Which acted as the chief instruments of administrative centralization. Of administrative centralization. Full stop. Subpoint. The foundation for this centralization was provided for by the extensive and centralized revenue machinery. Revenue machinery. Next main point. At the same time, next main point. At the same time, comma, there were practical limitations to the degree of centralization. To the degree of centralization. Full stop. Subpoint. Local officials must necessarily have exercised a high degree of autonomy and discretion due to the primitive means of transport and communication. Due to the primitive means of transport and communication. Full stop. Next subpoint. Central control could not have been homogeneous and was probably tiered, T-I-E-R-E-D, and was probably tiered with royal authority being strongest in the metropolis zone and lower and progressively lower in the core and peripheral regions. Next point, main point. A strong element of paternalism is evident in Mauryan administration. Full stop. Subpoint. In fact, in the Kalinga edict, Ashok addresses his subjects as his children. Full stop. Next sub point. Numerous inscriptions talk about relief work undertaken by the state for ordinary people affected by flood, famine, or war. याद है? Sohagora copper plate inscription, Mahasthan circular stone inscription, both Chandragupta Maurya period के inscriptions हैं. Then the Kalinga edict also, then the Piprava casket edict also, right? So all these things talk about relief work, rehabilitation, etc. Next sub point लिखो. Similarly, comma, ensuring the happiness of the subjects seems to be a priority for the state, resulting in welfare initiatives such as the digging of wells, provisioning of land, seeds, implements, and oxen to farmers, running free kitchens and rest houses, and planting of shady trees along prominent highways. Full stop. Next sub point. Not only this, comma, the Mauryan state also appears to be concerned about the moral and spiritual well-being of its subjects. As reflected in the precepts of Ashoka's Dhamma. Right? So Dhamma was given in the form of instructions or advice by a father to his children, that to do these things, you are going to be happy, you are going to be without sorrow, you are going to have a stable life, you are going to have a complete life, your life is going to be peaceful. Okay? So this is the kind of advice that the ruler was giving to his subjects from a position of authority, like a father who is teaching their children. Okay? So that also reflects the paternalistic attitude of the Mauryan state. Next sub point likho. At the same time, The Mauryan state did not hesitate to punish rebels and maintain discipline. Instead of discipline, right, order. Maintain order. ठीक है? So like a father, एक हाथ से टीचिंग्स दे रहा है, दूसरे हाथ में डंडा है, दोनों चीजें हो रही हैं साथ में. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. सॉरी, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. The Mauryan state was not simply a welfare state. In fact, welfareism appears to have been a later addition to its characteristics. Full stop. Like all large empires, the Mauryan state was also a war state. Created with violence and conquest. Full stop. Subpoint. It maintained a large permanent army that in many ways provided the real foundations of the state. Full stop. Next subpoint. Military strength was also the biggest factor behind territorial expansion, consolidation, and centralization. ठीक है? So it was a war state also. Next main point लिखो. The Mauryan state can also be characterized as a bureaucratic state. Stop. Subpoint. It had a large organized and centralized bureaucracy. Which became the link between the ruler, his administration, and the subjects. Full stop. Next subpoint. The Arthashastra and Ashokan edicts mention a long list of civil servants with specific duties and obligations. Full stop. Next subpoint. लिखो. There was a clear chain of command. There was a clear chain of command which connected functionaries at the lowest level of government or the lowest levels of administration. Lowest levels of administration directly to the top. ठीक है. Next subpoint. Such a system could not have functioned without meticulous record keeping. Meticulous record keeping. Full stop. Thus, we come face to face with a new class of officials who specialized in maintaining records. And several names have been mentioned to refer to them, such as Kayastha, Sthanika, Gopa, अक्षपत्तालाधिकृता. यहाँ पे लिख रहा हूं. अक्षपत्तालिधिकृता. युक्ताज. अक्षपत्तालिधिकृता. युक्ताज, etc. ठीक है. So it was a bureaucratic state as well. Next लिखो. Next main point. The Mauryan state was also an extensive state. The Mauryan state was also an extensive state. Full stop. Subpoint. Not only did it control a vast territory with a huge population, comma. It also performed several functions and enjoyed special powers not ordinarily seen in other contemporary states. Full stop. Next subpoint. Not only did it regulate the economy, comma, it also had a prominent economic role. Economic role. Next subpoint. Its welfare initiatives and concern for the moral well-being of its subjects, its welfare initiatives and concern for the moral well-being of its subjects also gave it additional roles. Gave it additional roles. Next लिखो. Next main point. It was also a polyglot state. It was also a polyglot state. Meaning that not only did it govern diverse groups and realms, comma, it had an inclusive approach towards them. It had an inclusive approach towards them. Full stop. Subpoint. There was no element of discrimination on the basis of religion, caste, or region. Next subpoint. Under Ashok, comma, while Buddhism was promoted, comma, there was no discrimination against Brahmins who continued to enjoy important political positions. Political positions. Next subpoint. Even foreign elements found a place within the Mauryan state as indicated by the appointment of Tusappa, a Greek ruler, as the provincial governor of Ashok, mentioned in the Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman. Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman. ठीक है, next main point लिखो. The Mauryan Empire was also a cultural state. Was also a cultural state. Full stop. Subpoint. A strong effort was made by the rulers to develop and imprint a new and distinct cultural identity. Full stop. Next subpoint. This is indicated by the large-scale construction of monuments such as stupas, pillars, and caves, the engraving of edicts by Ashok, the postulation of the Dhamma, and donations to the Sangha. Full stop. Next subpoint. This cultural identity was not meant to be restricted only within the Mauryan Empire. Rather, it was to be exported enthusiastically. It was to be exported enthusiastically. Do we have any evidence of or any instances that we can refer to with this regard? How the Mauryans were trying to export their cultural identity, their cultural values. Mahendra और संघमित्रा नाम सुने? Mahendra and Sanghmitra, son and daughter of Ashok, right? They were sent as Buddhist emissaries by Ashok to Sri Lanka in order to spread Buddhism over there. And with Buddhism also came Ashoka's Dhamma, right? So Dhamma भी वहां पे spread करने की कोशिश करी जाएगी. Similarly, Ashok also dispatched Dhammadutas in order to spread the ideals of Dhamma beyond his borders. He sent Dhammadutas to the rulers of Southeast Asia. He also sent Dhammadutas to all the Greek rulers who had been left behind in Alexander's shattered empire. Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, वहां तक ग्रीस तक भेज दिया लोगों को. ठीक है. So these are the kinds of activities that were undertaken in order to export Indian culture by Ashok. ठीक है. Write down example. Export Mauryan cultural identity. क्या है? हाँ, rather it was to be exported enthusiastically. Write down example. Sending Mahendra and Sanghamitra to spread Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Next example. Dispatching Dhammadutas that is Dhamma messengers or Dhamma ambassadors to the Greek kings in the West, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. In the 13th Major Rock Edict, he mentions that he sent Dhammadutas in order to obtain Dhamma Vijay, that is cultural conquest, to the courts of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, of Egypt, Antiochus II of Syria, Magas of Cyrene, Alexander of Epirus, and Antigonus of Macedonia. Okay. Similarly, he informs us that he sent Dhammadutas to the rulers of Sri Lanka and the royal courts of Suvarnadweep and Suvarnabhumi as well. Here, Ptolemy II Philadelphus of Egypt, Antiochus II of Syria, Magas of Cyrene, Alexander of Epirus, and Antigonus of Macedonia. So, with this, we can say that it was a cultural state. And lastly, likho. Fine. Next main point. Finally, the Mauryan state was a state with universal aspirations. Full stop. Subpoint. It tried not only to control the material aspects of its subjects' lives, of its subjects' lives, but to transform itself into a quasi-moral or spiritual institution. Quasi-moral or spiritual institution with the authority to instruct subjects on how to act and even think. And even think on how to act and even think. Okay? So obviously there would be some limitations to this. Not everybody is going to become a subscriber to the Mauryan spiritual or moral philosophy of Dhamma, but at least इसके लिए कोशिश चल रही थी. Dhamma Mahamatyas were also appointed and sent across the empire to ensure that the regulations of Dhamma were being observed. Okay? They were not being violated. तो ये हो गए characteristics of the Mauryan state. Now take down a question. On the basis of archaeology and literature, highlight the essential characteristics of the Mauryan state. $200 words, 15 marks. वो पैटर्नलिज्म वाला कहाँ पे है, पॉइंट लिखा हुआ है? शायद सेकंड या थर्ड होना चाहिए. मेन पॉइंट, थर्ड मेन पॉइंट शायद. A strong element of paternalism is visible. It reads, a strong element of paternalism is evident in Mauryan administration. In fact, in the Kalinga edict, Ashoka addresses his subjects as his children. Numerous inscriptions talk about the relief work undertaken by the state for ordinary people affected by flood, famine, or war. Similarly, ensuring the happiness of the subjects seems to be a priority for the state, resulting in welfare initiatives such as the digging of wells, provisioning of land, seeds, implements, and oxen to farmers, running free kitchens and rest houses, and planting shady trees along prominent highways. Not only this, the Mauryan state also appears to be concerned about the moral and spiritual well being of its subjects, as reflected in the precepts of Ashoka's Dhamma. At the same time, the Mauryan state did not hesitate to punish rebels and maintain order. ठीक है? So digging wells, provisioning of land, seeds, implements, and oxen to farmers, running free kitchens and rest houses, and planting of shady trees along prominent highways. Order के बाद वाला line. The Mauryan state was not simply a welfare state. In fact, welfareism appears to have been a later addition to its characteristics. In fact, welfareism appears to have been a later addition to its characteristics. Done. Now, तो मौर्यन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन वी हैव कवर्ड, बचता क्या है? मौर्यन सोसाइटी, मौर्यन इकोनॉमी, द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ धम्मा एंड इट्स इम्पैक्ट. ठीक. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल विल बी एड्रेसिंग मौर्यन सोसाइटी. नाउ what are the important sources to learn about Mauryan society? The various literary sources such as the Indica of Megasthenes, Buddhist texts, and Kautilya's Arthashastra. Megasthenes ने क्या किया था? इंडियन सोसाइटी को कैसे कवर किया था? He said that Indian society consisted of 7 classes or 7 genus, right? He had appropriated the method of Herodotus, who had earlier divided the Egyptian society into 7 groups. In fact, Herodotus was himself being informed by Plato's writings with regards to this. However, he appears to be much closer to understanding the prevailing social order when he said that people in India could not marry outside their genus and practice someone else's occupation. Okay? So, in his description, some things are going to be incorrect, but some things are going to be correct also. On the other hand, Buddhist texts mention 4 varnas, but with a changed hierarchy by putting Khatriya, that is Kshatriyas, above Babhan, that is Brahmin, while Vesa and Sudra, that is Vaishyas and Shudras, still continued on their earlier position. So order of positioning change किया, order of hierarchy change कर दिया था. Brahminism में Brahmins at the top, Buddhism में Kshatriyas at the top. Kautilya shows the old Brahminical prejudice in his approach and emphasizes on the 4-fold Varna system with privileges for Brahmins. So according to the Arthashastra, जो traditional Brahminical version of the 4-fold Varna system है, that was the valid one, right? But when we compare the Kautilian approach with the approach of the Dharma Sutras, the difference between the two becomes obvious. And क्यों होता है ये difference? Because we had seen in our last class कि दोनों टाइप्स के लिटरेचर का प्रायोरिटी अलग है. अर्थशास्त्र का प्रायोरिटी क्या था? अर्थ, दी मटीरियल वर्ल्ड, एंड धर्मशास्त्र का मोक्ष एंड धर्म, दैट इज द स्पिरिचुअल रेल्म. ठीक है. इन कंपैरिजन टू द वेरियस धर्म सूत्रास, अर्थशास्त्र डेफिनेटली हैज अ लीनियंट अप्रोच टुवर्ड द सोशल ऑर्डर. किस तरह से लीनियंसी दिखती है यहाँ पर? Unlike the Dharma Sutras, Arthashastra is soft towards the Shudras. He, in fact, categorizes the Shudras as Arya. And could the Arya people ever be enslaved? No. So he makes an argument against the enslavement of Shudras. Kautilya prefers to refer to the Shudras as Arya and asserts that Shudras cannot be enslaved. He, in fact, encourages their active involvement in agriculture. Okay? So he said that these Shudras should be assigned new land in uninhabited zones, maybe grasslands or forest areas, which they could then clear and then start agriculture. So he was thinking about the economic potential of Shudras as agriculturalists. And finally, taxpayers. Right? Also, the Arthashastra is lenient towards women. It deals respectfully with Ganikas. Who were Ganikas? Courtesans or prostitutes. Not only the Buddhist texts, but even the Gupta period texts talk about Ganikas as being extremely wealthy. They patronized art. They provided a huge source of revenue. Their houses were mansions जहाँ पे बहुत सारी cultural activities होती थी. So they performed important cultural functions as well. And he respectfully deals with the Ganikas. According to the Arthashastra, they were a source of royal income and they were patronized by the state as well. So they were a protected class. Okay. Above all, Kautilya was pragmatic enough to give social acceptance to all the 8 types of marriages, including the 4 adharma types of marriages. You remember Chandogya Upanishad mein 8 types of marriages had been described: 4 dharmaya type marriages and 4 adharmaya type marriages. Chandogya Upanishad had completely prohibited the 4 adharmaya type of marriages. ये क्या बोलता है? They should be allowed. Logic क्या है? He believed that the adharma type of marriages are rare, and if such marriages are not given social acceptance, then the offspring of such marriages have to undergo inhumane suffering. Now, Chandogya Upanishad and other Brahminical texts, they outline the punishments for adharmaya type marriages. क्या बोलते हैं? that their children should be considered chandalas, that they should be enslaved and outcast from the society, that they should be treated as untouchables, right? ये क्या बोल रहा है? That वैसे भी ये बहुत frequent नहीं होते हैं, and the sense of the father should not be borne by the children. So we would be unfairly treating the children of such marriages. Therefore, he says that they should be given acceptance and the offspring from such children should not be cast out of the society. Reason क्या है? Reason behind these differences is in the approaches of these two texts, as was their two texts was their respective priority. As the name suggests, the main objective of Dharma Sutra was to strictly maintain the social norms and traditions. These norms were based on the Varna divided society, which was based in turn on the dominance of the upper Varnas and males. But the priority of the arthashastra was different. What was it? The acquisition of artha or resources was the main objective of this text, so that a powerful monarchical state could be created. Thus, Kautilya was an innovator and his policy was guided by the politico-economic exigencies of the time. Due to this, Arthashastra dealt with the contemporary society in a different way. However, whether it be the Buddhist sources or the Brahmanical sources or Arthashastra, do any of them completely reflect the ground reality? No. So they were all normative in nature, right? While some inferences regarding the prevailing social conditions can be drawn from the works such as Arthashastra, etc., but we cannot make specific judgments about the conditions. Okay? So what were the practices that were actually in place in the different regions? What was the treatment or what was the attitude of the society towards different groups such as women or Shudras or Chandalas, etc. Clear hai? However, at the same time, we also know that the Arthashastra, Buddhist sources, and the Brahmanical literature of this period were reflecting the conditions of the society after it had already undergone a long process of social upheaval and churning. Okay? So it was different from the previous period, but it carried many of the imprints of the existing Brahmanical society. Clear? तो उसमें से हो सकता है 19-20 का फर्क आ गया होगा, लेकिन कंप्लीटली डिफरेंट नहीं हुआ. दैट इज व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू से. लिख लें इसको, राइट डाउन. मौर्यन सोसाइटी. मौर्यन सोसाइटी लिखो. Important sources to learn about Mauryan society include the Indica. To learn about Mauryan society include the Indica of Megasthenes, the Arthashastra of Kautilya, the Dharma Sutras, and the Buddhist literature. Full stop. Next point. They all provide. Next main point. They all provide a different description of social organization and institutions. Full stop. At the same time, similarities are also visible in their descriptions. Full stop. Next main point. According to the Indica, Indian society was divided into 7 classes, which Megasthenes refers to as genos. These included 1 2 3 4 करके लिखते हैं. सबसे ऊपर the philosopher class, philosophers. Number 2, farmers. Number 3, herdsmen. ठीक है, those who looked after herds of animals, shepherds बोल सकते हैं. Number 4, craftsmen. Number 5, soldiers. Number 6, inspectors. And last one, number 7, counselors. ठीक है, order, यही order mention किया है उसने. We do not know whether he was talking about this system in a hierarchical manner, but the kinds of description he gives, it appears that philosophers were at the highest position in the society, followed by the farmers. So they enjoyed the highest number of rights, privileges, and social respectability. Lowest थे the counselors. However, we cannot say for sure. But even though there is doubt, this is considered to be the proper order according to which Indian society was divided or classified as described by Megasthenes. तो modern historians इसको consider करते हैं that इसमें element of hierarchy present था. ठीक है. Now, next point, sub point लिखो. There are certain limitations. With this description. A B C करके लिखो. A, firstly, Indian society was based on varna and caste rather than classes. B, the ordering of the different genos does not seem to follow the traditional hierarchy of Indian society. मीनिंग कि सबसे पहली बात तो फिलोसफर क्लास इंडिया में कभी कोई था ही नहीं, राइट. Secondly, did farmers enjoy a higher status than soldiers, inspectors, or counselors? No. Did craftsmen enjoy a higher status than soldiers? No. So it does not follow the traditional hierarchy of Indian society. You see, it is conveniently similar to the description of Egyptian society given by whom? Herodotus. ठीक है? So it seems that Megasthenes had simply copied Herodotus. Next sub point लिखो. At the same time, some observations. At the same time, next sub point लिखो. ABC हो गया ना? अगला वाला लिखो जैसे limitations थे strength बताने हैं. At the same time, comma, some descriptions noted by Megasthenes about Indian society were true. Were true. Namely, एक करके लिखो. Indians could not marry or take up occupations outside their genus. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. The Dharma Sutras. The Dharma Sutras reflect the Brahmanical worldview and seek to uphold the traditional fourfold Varna order. Traditional fourfold Varna order with Brahmins at the top. With Brahmins at the top. Strict restrictions against Varna Samkar. क्या है ये? Intermixing of the Varnas. Strict restrictions against Varna Samkar and Shudras and women are prescribed. Are prescribed. Full stop. Education and education, comma, occupation and religious access was open to all or restrictive, was regulated by the Varna Ashram Dharma system. Strictly. Next sub point. The practice of untouchability is prescribed by these works who regard Chandalas to be impure. And who have been described as the Chandalas? The offspring of Anulom marriages between Brahmin women and Shudra men. Okay? Next. और क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? We also see growing emphasis on Gotra exogamy. Gotra exogamy as a means to ensure purity of the Varnas and prevent incest. ठीक है? Next लिखो. The contemporary, next main point. Buddhist literature. The contemporary Buddhist literature gives the picture of a more open and progressive society. Stop. Next up point. While the Varna based division is not discarded, comma, it is considered to be a man-made and artificial institution. धर्म सूत्रास क्या emphasize कर रहे थे? That these are natural and divine institutions. These divisions are not made by man. They exist because God has differentiated between different individuals. Further, they associated, Buddhist literature associated the Varna status of an individual with karma or action. Varna status of an individual with karma or action. Next sub point. Further, Brahmins have been given a subordinate position to Kshatriyas in the Buddhist Varna order. Next point. Similarly, Vaishyas and Shudras. Next point. Similarly, Varna order, Buddhist Varna order. Next point. Similarly, Vaishyas and Shudras have been given much greater freedoms, including access to education, comma, the freedom to pursue any occupation and to join the Sangha as well. Next up point. The attitude towards women also appears much more lenient. Stop. They had access to subpoint. They had access to education. Comma. Remarry. And join the संघा. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. दिस इज टू बी एक्सपेक्टेड. दिस इज टू बी एक्सपेक्टेड since the Buddhist scholars were attempting to overhaul and reform the prevalent social order. The prevalent social order. A prevalent social order में all the rules were made by Brahmins. Therefore, Buddhist literature में would it have similarities with Brahminical social order or dissimilarities? कुछ similarities होंगी लेकिन dissimilarities ज़्यादा होंगी. That is why this kind of thing emerged. Next लिखो, next main point. The arthashastra of Kautilya also presents an alternative to the Brahmanical social order. Without breaking away from it completely. Full stop. Since, next point, since its author, sub point लिख लो. Since its author was a Brahmin, comma, some degree of Brahmanical prejudice is visible. Namely, he accepts the Brahmanical fourfold Varna system with special privileges for Brahmins. ठीक है. Next up point. However, comma, Kautilya's perspective is very different from the traditional Brahmanical sources, such as the Dharma Sutras. such as the Dharma Sutras. Full stop. इसके अंदर एक और सब पॉइंट लिखो. While the Dharma Sutras were interested primarily in upholding dharma, comma, the arthashastra suggests that society should be organized in order to maximize the goal of earth. That is materialism. समझ में आया? Therefore, next सब पॉइंट कर लो इसी में ही. Therefore, the arthashastra has suggested modifications to the traditional practices, especially if to the traditional social practices, especially if they were harmful to the economy. They were harmful to the economy. ठीक है? अब आगे लिखना शुरू करिए. Go back to the previous indentation, bullet points के फॉर्म में, right? अगला सब पॉइंट लिखो. The arthashastra displays leniency towards women, Shudras and Chandalas. Towards women, Shudras and Chandalas. A, B, C करके लिखो. A. For instance, he refers to the Shudras as Arya. And advises against their enslavement. Full stop. Instead, they should be allotted land in unoccupied areas and encouraged to expand agriculture. Full stop. Next sub point B. He further prescribes that the offspring of adharmaya marriages should not be automatically categorized as chandalas. Instead, the four adharmaya type marriages should be regarded as legitimate. Full stop. As legitimate. Full stop. His logic was that such marriages were rare and condemning children from them as chandalas was an extremely harsh, unfair, and permanent punishment. So stop. Next point. Similarly, the arthashastra exhibits leniency towards women who are recognized as an important economic source or economic resource. Full stop. Kautilya prescribes that women should have the right to education, inheritance, and remarriage. Education, inheritance, and remarriage. Why should women be allowed to remarry according to the Arthashastra? Economic reasons की वजह से जितने भी arguments कर रहा है all from the point of economy कर रहा है. क्या economic utility है remarriage का? Suppose a young woman's husband dies and she is not allowed to remarry, will she be able to have any children? No. So her reproductive potential is wasted. The economy is going to be deprived of valuable workers and consumers, and the economy as a result is going to be left much poorer. So allow her to remarry, have a new family, and this would be kinder towards the women also. She should be allowed to inherit her father's property. She should have a right in her father's property. Why? Because once again, she would now become a an owner of wealth and property, and she could also pay taxes. ठीक है. So she could invest this wealth, this property in order to produce. उससे taxes बनेंगे, employment भी generate होगा. She should have education. Why? हाँ, she would be a more productive member of the workforce. That is the reason why. ठीक है. So more leniency towards these groups. Now, ये जो alternative है to the Dharma Sutras without completely breaking from them is also reflected in the legal attitude of the Arthashastra. In the sphere of law, क्या बोलता है ये? That laws का एक ही सोर्स है या कई सोर्सेस हो सकते हैं? कई सोर्सेस हो सकते हैं. He recognizes two sources of law which are both valid. कौन से? Laws mentioned in the Dharma Sutras and royal decrees or secular laws. Both of them are given legitimacy. But which is superior? The secular laws are superior, which the king can make without consulting the Dharma Sutras or the experts in the Dharma Sutras. Okay? If there is a conflict between the two, the secular law shall prevail. For example, the king can make a law that from this period onwards, the Shudras are not going to be enslaved. Dharma Sutras say something else. They say that Shudras are not Arya and are fit for enslavement, but he can declare them as Arya. He can make a decree that the adharmaya marriages are now going to be considered legitimate and the offspring from them are not going to be considered chandalas. This is in conflict against the laws mentioned in the Dharma Sutras. The royal law is going to prevail. Similarly, he can give education, inheritance, and the right to remarry to women. This is once again in conflict against the Dharma Sutras, but it is going to prevail. Okay? That is the idea. So, लिखो next sub point. Write down. The Arthashastras, more practical approach is also reflected in its legal and judicial prescriptions. Full stop. Subpoint. While the Arthashastra considers the laws of the Dharma Sutras to be valid, he does not consider them to be supreme and immutable. Immutable. Change नहीं कर सकते. And immutable. Full stop. Next subpoint. Kautilya recognizes the authority of the ruler to make laws from time to time without depending on the Dharma Sutras. Full stop. Such secular laws should have primacy. Such secular laws should have primacy over the religious law. Over the religious law. ठीक है? Now, the Arthashastra, like the Dharma Sutras, also recognizes the institution of slavery. But is the attitude of the Arthashastra towards slaves going to be the same as the attitude mentioned in the Dharma Sutras? No. Once again, it has a lenient attitude towards slaves. First of all, it prohibits the enslavement of Shudras and other economically productive groups. Rather, it suggests that Shudras should be given land and the means to expand agriculture. Further, it says that there should be strict restrictions against the killing of slaves. Dharma Sutras क्या बोलते हैं? Slaves or dasas are impure and can be killed by the masters. However, both the Dharma Sutras as well as the Arthashastra try to instruct the slave owners not to kill slaves unnecessarily. Lekin Arthashastra goes further. It says that those who kill their slaves without just cause must be severely punished. There were heavy fines, and in some cases, even capital punishment could be given. Further, with regards to slavery, अलग-अलग categories of slaves present थे. For example, slaves involved in manual labor or involved in agriculture or in mines or domestic slaves, domestic work जो करते हैं. Women were enjoyed as pleasure slaves also, right? And over here he says that slaves का life को protect करना चाहिए. Slaves should be treated kindly with proper housing, proper food, etc. ये सब करना चाहिए. What if a master and a female slave have a child? Then in that case, both the mother and child should be automatically given freedom. That is what the Arthashastra suggests. Further, the child should also have a right to inherit the property of his father. So these are the kinds of prescriptions that are given in the Arthashastra with regards to slaves, which are very different from the prescriptions of the Dharma Sutras. अब अगर शूद्रास को एनस्लेव नहीं कर सकते तो किसको एनस्लेव कर सकते हो? Prisoners of war. ठीक है? So prisoners of war formed the largest category of slaves in the Mauryan Empire. People even had the right to sell themselves into slavery. ठीक है? Why would you do that? Because you are in debt and you want to repay your debt. So until and unless you have paid off your debt, you remain in slavery. But once your debt is repaid, you are free. You can also purchase your freedom back. ठीक है? लिखो. हाँ, next point. Like the Dharma Sutras, the Arthashastra also recognizes the legitimacy of the institution of slavery. Legitimacy of the institution of slavery. Full stop. It talks about different categories of slaves, such as domestic slaves, including slaves used for household work, and pleasure slaves, along with slave used as manual labor in farms, mines, and workshops. Full stop. Next point. However, इसी पॉइंट में कंटिन्यू करो. इसी पॉइंट नहीं, इसी में कंटिन्यू करो. However, comma, Kautilya's attitude towards slavery is much more lenient than the Dharma Sutras. Than the Dharma Sutras. Than the Dharma Sutras. सब पॉइंट्स में लिखो. Kautilya advises the king to prevent the unnecessary killing of slaves, and prescribes heavy punishments for violators. So stop. Next sub point. If a female slave has a child with her master, then both the child and the mother should be immediately freed. Full stop. The master would have to support them. And master would have to support them, and the child would be eligible to inherit his father's property. Next sub point. Slaves should have the right to marry, and their children, should they be considered slaves or free? Should be considered free. Full stop. Next sub point. Further, people were permitted to sell themselves into slavery. For predetermined periods of time. Into slavery for predetermined periods of time. To repay debts. repay debts. ठीक है, सो जो क्रेडिटर और डेटर है उनके बीच में एक समझौता होगा ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ विच a legal contract would be drawn up through which the debtor agrees to become the slave of the creditor for a particular period of time. Upon the fulfillment of that period, the debtor would be given his freedom. Next subpoint. Similarly, comma, slaves had the right to own property. Slaves had the right to own property and could purchase their freedom. And could purchase their freedom. ठीक है, ये हो गए अलग अलग sources and what they say about the Mauryan society, right? Now, what is the conclusion we can draw? Write down, main point likho. Thus, it is clear that there was no unanimous agreement among the contemporary scholars with regards to social hierarchy, organization, and rules of interaction. Full stop. The Indian sources on this subject were normative and do not necessarily reflect ground reality. Full stop. The real picture must have been a composite one, with Brahmanical, Buddhist, and Cotilian principles being applied in unique combinations among different regions or among different groups and in different regions. Full stop. What we can say is that the social conflict and transformation of the Buddha age had entered its next phase. full stop. The codification of social rules in these normative texts from different perspectives is a reflection of the same. ठीक है? So in many ways जो social processes second urbanization के period में शुरू हुए थे वो अब अपने नए फेज में एंटर कर गए थे. एंड प्रूफ क्या है? That different scholars are coming up with their own set of social rules in order to prescribe what the society should be like, what are the rules on the basis of which it should function. Take down a question. Kautilya is unique among Indian scholars of the ancient age. Stop. Discuss his views on society and highlight the differences with respect to ordinary intellectuals. क्या करना है हमें? We need to highlight the differences between the arthashastra and the traditional writings informed to us by the dharma sutras, right? तो हमें बताना क्या होगा कि इसके पीछे रीजन क्या था. That is what makes Kautilya unique actually. All the other normative Brahmanical texts which focus upon society, its organization, and the rules of interaction are concerned with what? Upholding dharma, the Brahmanical social order, preserving the supreme position of Brahmins within society. Kautilya का भी यही concern है क्या? No. While he accepts the validity of the fourfold Varna system and the laws codified in the Dharma Sutras, his actual objective is to realize and maximize artha. That is why we will see that while Kautilya has provided an alternative to the laws, social laws of the Dharma Sutras without completely breaking from them, but alternative जरूर provide किया है. On social issues, Arthashastra appears to be much more progressive and lenient than the traditional or ordinary works of this period. In the field of Dharma versus Artha, leniency towards women, Shudras and Chandalas, with regards to the various sources of law and the institution of slavery. Okay? So this is what we can do. Next, we need to talk about, समझ में आ गया ना society? Next, we need to talk about the Mauryan economy. This we are going to do on Monday. Okay? I have a little work today, so that is why I have to leave a little early. तो Monday को मिले. शुभ्रनिल. Shall we meet on Monday? So some similarities are going to be there, but on many things, Arthashastra is going to disagree with the Dharma Sutras. That is what we need to point out. After all, the Arthashastra was also written by a Brahmin scholar only, na? So he is not going to dismiss the fourfold Varna system. But other laws ke upar he is going to show a lot of divergence. That is the point we have. Okay. Chaliye then. Thank you for your time. I'll see you Monday.